After working with the filmmaker Alice Penfather on my choreography of Birdsong, I was inspired to make a new film. The project of Birdsong had been a complete joy and a massive learning curve, as filmmaking was something completely new for me. I'd learnt so much. I wanted to put my newly acquired knowledge into practice. The initial idea for a new film came rehearsing our dancer Georgina in my garden at home for Birdsong. The shadows on the lawn struck me as particularly striking and unusual, so this was my first inspiration. The story grew much more slowly. All I knew was that I wanted to dance myself. I felt I had a little more in me, even in my 60s. It was just a matter of creating choreography that suited what I could do now. One day I was staring out at the garden, and the idea of using the stump of a recently felled tree came to me. And I was planning to use a very beautiful copper beech tree in the garden. So now I had a plan: a stump, a shadow, a tree. It all flowed from there. The spirit of the felled tree would be grieving the loss of her home and would search for a new one. Luckily, I had both my cameraman, my patient husband, and my location, the garden, on tap to help me plan. There were a few challenges in the garden. In the first part with the stump, it was impossible to dance on the undergrowth barefoot, so I did it in trainers and we just filmed the upper body. I rather liked this because it was as if the spirit had lost her legs and was reaching with her arms until the first tree she approaches casts her out onto the lawn. Then she finds her legs and asks the shadow to help her. Or maybe she thinks the shadow is a tree? Who knows? Although I experimented with choreography in my little dance studio, most of the movement which ended up in the film was created on site in the garden or improvised on the day. The feeling of dancing outside with the space and nature around me was so inspiring and different from the confines of the studio. But the ground around the final tree is uneven and on a slope, very different from a flat floor. We waited for the perfect day in March to start shooting, when there was full sun and no clouds, a rare occurrence in London, and the tree creating the shadow was not yet in leaf. It was only 11 degrees Celsius, but it was essential to film so the sun was just in the right spot to create the shadow. The beginning with the stump came next in early May. The bluebells were still out, which picked out the colour in the skirt of the costume. And a couple of days later, we filmed under the copper beech. Again, we had to wait for the right moment when the leaves were fully out and with that lovely copper colour. They turned green later on. It was quite windy that day, but in the end, I think the wind gives it a great atmosphere, blowing the little branch at the top of the frame and the dancer's skirt. There were random things like that which enhanced the film and were not planned. So far, so good. Just one little problem. I had made an entire film in silence, occasionally taking some inspiration for movement from a random piece of music, but mostly finding the rhythms through the movement and story. I was left with a 4-minute silent film. I knew I wanted a solo piano for the music, so I asked an old school chum of mine, Pamela, who is in the music profession, if she could recommend anyone. Luckily, she suggested the very talented Canadian pianist Elisabeth Pillon. The final touch of magic came with Elisabeth's beautiful and sensitive composition and rippling fingers over the keyboard.